Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to this session. Just as a reminder, the topic, 2 years after an attempt of recapitulation, a grand topic. I'm Patrycja Sasnal. I work at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, where we have a small project, Middle East and North Africa. I'm responsible for it. But you came here to listen to these four people, whom I will introduce briefly. Angus Blair, the first to my left, the president of the Signet Institute in Cairo, and renowned economist with 30 years of experience, most of which I assume you have spent in the Middle East. Ahmed Driss, to my immediate left, the president of the Center for Mediterranean and International Studies in Tunis. He's also the director of the Tunisian School of Politics. And we have luckily cooperated with Ahmed at the Institute on a number of occasions. Thanks. Amira Hass, who is the reporter for Haaretz, the Israeli daily. She has lived in the Palestinian territories for the past 20 years, at least, I imagine. And she's covered the territories and the Israeli occupation in there for Haaretz. And then we have Robert Wexler, who is the president of S. Daniel Abraham Center for Middle East Peace, a former Democratic congressman also, and he served as a foreign policy advisor to President Obama in both of his presidential campaigns, which I guess is of interest today also. Before I give the floor to the panelists, I just want to very briefly say a couple of words. We are gathered here today, in part at least, in commemoration of Bronisław Geremek, one of the founding fathers of modern post-1989 Poland, an activist who brought qualitative change to the lives of millions of Poles. A great scholar, a great intellectual. But it's not only Bronisław Geremek whom I want to recall by way of introduction to this panel. In 2 weeks' time, it will be 10 years since the death of Edward Said. Also an intellectual. Like Geremek, he was a renowned scholar who worked to bring the same qualitative change to the lives of Arab peoples. But unlike Geremek, he was not successful in doing so. But his ideas, like the Orientalist approach of the West to the Middle East, is perhaps alive today more than it has been. I'm asking myself, and I'm asking you also, what is it that made Geremek and Central Europe succeed in the 1990s in their struggle for greater freedom, but made Said and now makes the Arab world seem to lag behind in this endeavor? Today, as we speak, literally, as we sit here, a ferocious fight continues on the outskirts of Damascus in a place called Ma'lula. It's a sacred place dating back to the 5th century before Christ, where the language of Christ is still spoken, Aramaic. Paradoxically, it was Bashar al-Assad who established an institute to teach this language so it does not die out. Ma'lula, now under attack, is our common Christian and Muslim place of worship and possibly the oldest surviving cradle of our single common culture. A place where I think the roots of Geremek and Said mold into one. Is it an ominous sign? This is the question that I'm posing to you and the panel as well. An ominous sign for the future, or just a momentary setback in what is happening in the region? I will start this conversation by rephrasing this question. And just so you know how we go about this panel, we will spend not much, I hope, than 30 minutes talking here and discussing the issues in the topic of the session, but we really want to involve you in the conversation. So please be courageous and raise your hands even during our discussion if you want to take part in it. Then afterwards, of course, the floor will be given to you, but the way we want to do it is really to engage you. So Angus, Ahmed, Amira, Robert, given the initial enthusiasm in 2011 and then the subsequent setback or the slowdown of the Arab awakening, Do you see that the Arab world is going in the right direction or a more optimistic future or not? Please be very, very brief. 3 minutes. Ahmed.
Thank you. I would say, obviously not. Simply not. The Arab world is not going in the right direction. It's not going to a better future. We spent decades to convince people that we are like you. Not in the Fukuyama vision, but we share some values. We are like you. We are in the history. And now we are giving some elements that we are again out of the history. Because we had the chance to change our future, to change our destiny, to refuse dictatorship. But now, in some part of the Arab world, we are applauding dictatorship again. And it is strange. It is not understandable for me. That's why I said simply not. We are not in the right direction. But it is a simple answer, let's say. But the answer should also be more complicated than that, because we have to in which angle we are. And we have to distinguish between countries, and we have to distinguish between situations. But we have no time now to develop, let's say, not, and that's.
I too would say that the record is mixed, but I don't think we should confuse the tumultuous activities, the frightening violence, and the setbacks with good policy versus bad policy. When it comes to people seeking dignity, seeking self-determination, seeking greater freedoms, regardless of the geography in which they live, there's a right side of history and there's a wrong side of history. And the United States and our allies, our partners, it's a difficult challenge, and certainly it becomes a more difficult challenge when things get murky, as they have been in Egypt. But the bottom line is, for the United States, and I would respectfully suggest, particularly for our Eastern and Central European allies, that the right side of history is to support those efforts. And there's no ifs, there's no ands, and there's no buts. There's a false question that has often been presented, and that question essentially, it pits liberalization, the desire for freedom, self-determination versus stability. It's an entirely false equation. The problems in the Arab world today, the reason why we're not all just here saying it's a success, the underlying problem is not because a group of authoritative leaders were overthrown. The problem of the instability in the Arab world is because the 5 decades of complete inadequate leadership in the Arab world. The root cause of the violence and the decay and the corruption and the lack of economic opportunity and the lack of freedom essentially was encapsulated in the UN report in 2002 about the human development in the Arab world. When 50% or more of women in Egypt are illiterate, it's hard to build a successful society. So I'm sure we will expand upon this, but I would argue all of us, from our different perspectives, have an obligation to be on the right side of history, no matter how difficult that path will be, but we have an obligation to be there.
Thanks. I am pretty sure that we will get back to how the United States wants to be on the right side of history in the current situation. Amira.
Yeah, with my Messianic Jewish Marxist background, it's very hard to, it's very tempting to answer yes to your question that the future, etc., is positive. And still, and yet, if I see something positive, very positive for the future, is the fact that these peoples have experienced their revolts, their overthrow of rulers, of despotic rulers, and even though it has failed by now, in a large, and only 2 years after, still it remains in the memory and it's engraved in the future, which will be history of these peoples. And you, more than any other peoples, I mean, Poles and East Europeans, you know how important it is to add to this, to the CV of peoples, to add this experience of revolts and uprisings in order to repeat them. This is also a very important lesson to rulers and to despotic rulers of today. So this is what gives me some kind of hope, even though the picture now is very, very gloom.
Angus, the Cairo view on it.
It's interesting, Patricia, you mentioned why is it different from Central and Eastern Europe. Well, first of all, your leaders left. They left and new leaders came, and they set a new agenda, from which you then created your new states and new state of being. That is not the case for much of the MENA region yet, where you see fighting. Education and culture also played a significant role, and you can see the difference qualitatively where, not always, but in the Middle East where there is education, and the quality of education, for example, in Tunisia, where there is a more, from my view, a more rational debate than is taking place currently in Egypt, for example. The region is in a long-term revolution. We sometimes forget the history of Europe or America, or even in Britain in the Civil War, or through the Victorian era right into the 20th century, where there were decades of change, some of it violent, where there had to be change for the fighting of the right being done, of civil society being created, of women getting the vote, and so on. It took a long time. So we have to realize that we are in a long-term change across the whole of the Middle East, as it is also taking place in other countries. I have to say, I was reminded, as Robert and Mr. Driss were speaking, that it reminded me of when I went to Aleppo in about 2004, where I took a photograph across Aleppo and I saw thousands upon thousands of satellite dishes. And even though that was a country where there was no political discourse, it gave me hope that many people saw through satellite television a discourse and a debate and change in other countries that informed them. And of course then, obviously, there was the internet and social networks. And it has created a milieu where the young are at a remove from their leaders. And leaders across the region still do not get what the young are at. I think that the leaders, especially in the Gulf, think that it being life is all about getting money. It's not. It's about dignity. It's about not being disassociated from policies and the general discourse on politics, and young people wanting to be in charge of their destiny. I think that the sadness is that there's no critique generally in many of the states. No, there's no room for political critique. I think in the West, and I have to say from my view of the talk that we just heard, it is an Orientalist approach where there is no critique or little or minimal critique of the leaders of the region. I think that is sad. I think that there are apologists for leaders in the region. I think it calls for a greater, less politically correct debate and discourse on the MENA region. I think that where the West is helping the Middle East, and I know there's a debate about this tomorrow, much of that help is being now is being saying we don't want it. I think that is sad. I think it's the openness and avenues for helping are closing, not opening. I think that in the end it has to be internal changes that we have to sit back and allow the internal change to take place. I'm not talking at the moment on Syria. We may come back to that at the moment. I think that the region's leaders look upon and try to create a political narrative that is black and white. Either you're with us or against us. At its most absolute being seen in Syria. They have created the situation that they had wanted from the beginning that has not allowed nuance or political debate because it started as a civil change under peace. I think that if you look in Egypt where I live, state television and media is full of hate and vitriol. I said that even before the uprising. That has to change. Egypt deserves better in its ancient civilization and, of course, its intellectual history. It deserves a better state media to allow it to have a more reasoned discourse rather than now the hatred of the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'm not defending them, but to allow a media that allows reasoned adult debate. That is not the case at the moment. I just spent about a month in Lebanon this year, back and forth, in a country that has not yet recovered from its civil war, where sectarian divisions are as great as they ever were, that is tearing itself at the seams, I think, with what's happening next door, where there are more Syrian school children in Lebanon than there are Lebanese school children ready to go to school. There are many other serious issues there, of course, but we can come back to that. But I want to mention what Amira said, and it's about the young. I mentioned, as I said earlier, the young have a different milieu. They want to have a change in their countries. They're very well educated in Lebanon, for example, or in Egypt or elsewhere in Tunisia. They're full of ideas. They're entrepreneurs. They want to create a change, but the system isn't really set up to help them. So they're creating this subtext within the financial services sector or around entrepreneurial ability to create a new kind of dynamic, working from the bottom. You don't see it much at the moment, but it is there in Tunisia to an extent. It is definitely there in Egypt and in Lebanon and in Jordan most effectively, I think, more than in the Gulf. So that gives me hope that the young, at the moment, despite everything else, are still hopeful in their own future and in their destiny. But it's a tough challenge, and I find that the role of the West, it does have a role to play, but at the moment I think we have to step back a little and find different ways in which we can work with people in the region who want us to help them.
Thanks. I think the social aspect is, of course, very important, but at the same time, the young, they don't want to be involved in politics, or not as much as we would think they would. I remember the first time I went to Syria in 2002, I also took photographs of buildings literally full of satellite dishes. And there were many more satellite dishes in Syria than there were in Poland at that time, even, you would say, looking around. But then I went to Cairo and the same thing happened. They also had satellite dishes. But now you see that politics makes all the difference. And different things are happening in Egypt and different things are happening in Syria, although not that much recently. So coming back to politics, Ahmed, could you decipher for us? You know, there is a temptation to make this comparison between Egypt and Tunisia because Tunisia was supposed to be the beacon of change, the great example, and soon Egypt would follow. But will Tunisia become the next Egypt? Decipher the Tunisian politics for us, please. Oh, sorry.
I have no one. No, obviously not. Tunisia will not become the next Egypt. But let me first tell you about Tunisia, because Tunisia, it was the first Arab country where the revolts began. What is the situation now? Can we continue to be optimistic about the situation in my country? Because if we can still be optimistic in Tunisia, that probably means that we can be optimistic for the other part of the Arab world. But in Tunisia, we are in the phase of gestation, if I would say. But it is a very difficult gestation. And this is No, it's a gestation, مخاض. So this is very difficult. This is due to, in my sense, to 4 elements. The first one, and this we can share it with other Arab countries. The first one is the lack of a culture of democracy. There is no culture of democracy. That's clear. And our rulers, the rulers that we have now, they have now the chance to be in a democratic environment. That's okay. But the problem that now they have to show that they are democratic. But the most important component of the troika, of the alliance that they are ruling the country today, the Islamist party, Nahda, most probably they are democratic in their inside the party, but they don't care about establishing real democracy in Tunisia. They are replacing another system by almost the same system. Their main objective is to be in power, not to establish a democracy. And this phase of the history of Tunisia is to establish a democracy. There's to draft a constitution, a new constitution for a new Tunisia. But they care about power. They care about to be powerful in the country and not to establish a democracy. This is the first element. The second one is that the rulers that we have now have the will to cut with the past. That's true. But they consider that all the past of Tunisia was a sort of abyss. I don't know what is the word in English. Abyss. It was so there are no past, there are no history in Tunisia, and everything will start with their presence. Though they are trying to convince us that at least the 60 last years since the independence, it was an abyss. It was a catastrophe. But don't forget that Tunisia was an emergent country economically speaking. It was open to the rest of the world, etc., etc. And I think that if we have to build a democracy, we have to continue to be open and to continue to have the same kind of relationship with our neighbors and other countries in the region. So I think that this is an initial error of the actual error, to cut with everything in the past. The third element, which is due to the fact that the situation is difficult now, is the people who are ruling also the country today are not experimented. It's the inexperimented people. But this is not the real problem, because they can have a sort of advisors, very good advisor, and that can. But they are incompetent. That is also not problematic, but inexperienced and incompetent people with a new culture of booty. They have to get everything for them. ثقافة الغنيمة. This is I think. Yes, of booty or le butin, avoir tout. This is also problematic. Have this willing to get everything for them. It's a real problem. And this is also linked to another problem, which is populism. We have the country, we have a budget, we have resources, and let's spend those resources to have voices, and not to think about the future of the country. And they are trying to get hold of the state. This is very problematic, I think. So they are preparing their perenity. This is a real problem. Thinking about their future in power, not in the. The fourth element, why it's difficult. There is a dark connection between part of the rulers that we have now in Tunisia, and in particular the Islamist component of the alliance, and the extremists, the radicals, the Salafists, the jihadi coming from the Salafists. There is a dark connection. Of course, the moderate party that we have tried to convince us that there are no connections, those are our enemies too, but still, part of the Tunisians are convinced that there is a dark connection between them. And this dark connection, this connivance between them, get the situation more complicated because we have, and security is linked to this dark connection. And stability is connected to this dark connection because government have to get some strong decisions against them, but in fine, there are no decisions coming against those radicals, against those. So insecurity and instability are linked to that. And of course, the result that we are on the edge of the abyss, let's say. But still, the situation is not like in Egypt, because those are political actors, and those political actors try to solve the situation politically. In Egypt, we have another kind of actors. The army have since the beginning a strong role in Egypt, and we have army in Tunisia cannot have the same role, cannot play the same role, have the same intentions, and have the same ambitions. That can be explained by the role of the army in Tunisia since the beginning, and the relationship between the first president after the independence and army, which is a little bit suspicious about the army, and tried to cut all support that the army can get and can have, so that this relation between the politics and army in Tunisia get army out of the game since the beginning. And also the chief or the different chiefs of the army in Tunisia have a strong connection also with army in democratic countries, and they have their education there, etc. And also that this was the will of the political power to get an army in touch with democracies, and then they have the culture of democracies. We can find the culture of democracies within the chiefs of army more than in the political in Tunisia. That's strange, but that's true. So without the support of the army in Tunisia, we cannot imagine that a coup against the Islamist party or against the rulers now is possible. But I don't think that the idea to prepare a coup and to change things using violence in Tunisia is an option. It's not an option. And even if there are a lot of problems between the opposition and between the rulers, the ruling party now in Tunisia, but things will be solved again by using the political and the legal means. And you have the people in front of the assembly now, and since 2 months now in Lubardo, in front of the assembly, but asking to solve the situation politically and by dialogue, not by using violence. That's why the situation in Tunisia cannot be in the same way of Egypt.
Right. So even though you were pessimistic in general, the situation in Tunisia is much more optimistic than it seems.
Yeah, yeah.
One immediate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everyone on the panel. I just wanted to refer back to, I'm going to take also, if I may, from what Professor Kappel in a very short intervention. First, actually, when I present myself, I'm Tamer Meligi. I'm the Deputy Ambassador of Egypt in Warsaw. First, actually, when we received your kind invitation, and you mentioned in the first paragraph that revolutions in Egypt and Tunisia, protests in Turkey, and recent coup in Egypt. I thought, well, maybe the invitation because they were done in early time. But today, actually, I noticed that Professor Kappel, when he was commenting on the situation in Egypt, and also some of our panelists here, that we are still referring to what happened in Egypt as a coup. I'm sorry to say that it cannot be considered a coup because, if I may just finish, I will not take long. What we are trying to say that on the 30th of June, the 3rd, and the 26th of July, millions of Egyptians went to the streets. These Egyptians were the same Egyptians that were cheered all over the world in 2011 when the army took over in power. Yes, please. We are also talking about Egypt. We're comparing all the time between Egypt and Tunisia. Okay.
I thought it was about Tunisia.
Patricia, we didn't mention the coup.
Yeah, we didn't mention the coup. It's mentioned actually in the booklet, I think. But Angus, I wanted to turn to you now, exactly, not only about Egypt, but you represent the business society, more or less, and economy plays an important role in what has been happening in the Arab world for the past more than 2 years. And United Nations Development Agency reports were mentioned a couple of times. 2002 it started, but there were many more. And they cited the lack of jobs, that 50 million jobs will have to be created in a very short time span. How important is this economic factor, and how do you deal with it on a daily basis in your work?
Yeah, it's significant, absolutely significant. I want to just very quickly and say to you, I know that the Western general critique don't get nuance, they don't understand the nuance of Egypt, so I know where you're coming from. But we didn't mention the issue, and I think it's far more complex than I think is easily expressed in the media, so I know where you are. First of all, if I look at the Egyptian example, I started covering the whole region about more than 20 years ago, and one issue I think that has held the region back is the lack of attention on growing the economy, with one of the youngest demographic profiles in the world. Within Egypt, the population growth is just over 2% per annum. It is absolutely vital that all leaders everywhere focus on creating the right conditions to grow the economy as quickly as possible. I remember meeting the former President Morsi before he stood for election, and my initial impression of him never changed when he became president, as someone who was out of touch with good economic philosophy. I think that everyone was in despair the longer he was in power, along with his prime minister. And I'm not trying to be political. I'm being absolutely based on fact on what the business community and general Egyptians saw, is that throughout his tenure as president, his priority was positioning the Muslim Brotherhood in all positions of power. And we don't discuss that. We do not discuss the problems that Egypt at the time were facing were huge. The country was running into the ground economically. Foreign exchange reserves were falling. Confidence was falling. The difference you had in Central and Eastern Europe, to go back to your first issue, was Your leaders came in and immediately focused on doing what was right for the overall economy and the betterment of the people at large. That is not the case across much of the Middle East. But it's not just about money. Let me go back to my point. It is not only about money. It's about giving people pride in everything to do with their country and finding a position within that to express their position so that they are not disassociated from decision making. And if you look at the Gulf, where, say, economic growth is about 7 or 8% in Qatar, a bit stronger in Libya despite the problems of the various militia, that really nowhere in the Middle East is the economy growing strongly enough to provide enough new jobs for job seekers looking for jobs. So it has to be part of the overall political equation that what is a government going to do to create the right conditions for economic growth? And I don't really see that. I don't see it anywhere. I don't see it to enough extent even in Egypt, because everyone's firefighting because you have to pay off $5 billion to oil companies historically. You have inflation at 15%.
And the new government? The new government has embarked on economic reform.
Marginally. I'm disappointed, I have to say, in Egypt by... some of them are good people, Ahmed Galal and Ziad Bahieddine. They're great intellects. I have to say I've got a lot of time for them. But I'm disappointed they haven't yet come out with a stronger economic platform where they should have cut corporate taxes, cut personal taxes, found other ways to have fiscal incentives to try to induce confidence rather than tinkering around the edges. It's a bit like the discussion on the Constitution. I would have flung the Constitution out. I think it's disastrous. I would have gone back and created a new, short, simplified constitution that doesn't describe what Egypt is. We already know what it is. If you came to me as a British person and said, we're telling you this is what you are as a British person, I would give you a very strong Anglo-Saxon phrase and tell you what to do. I would tell you to F up, go away. You're not telling me what I am. You don't have to tell an Egyptian who they are. It shouldn't be in the constitution. You focus on the rights. You focus on the rights as individuals. Forget about any elements of religion. It doesn't matter. It's what you are as an individual. I think the issue is that the overall debate across the Middle East from our perspective, going back as I used the word earlier, was Orientalist. We're not going into the detail of what really needs to be done to improve the overall lot of people, provide the right conditions for economic growth, provide the right conditions for civil society, the right conditions, to use a phrase from Winston Churchill when he was asked in 1948 by the Italian government, what kind of constitution should they have, is about 10 principles, one of which is to ensure the right conditions that no one comes knocking at your door in the middle of the night and whisks you off to prison with no right under the law that would keep you safe. These are the certain simple principles that you should put into a constitution, that you focus on what is right in a society. And I still don't see it. Even in the Gulf, I don't see it in Saudi Arabia. I don't see it in Qatar. I don't see it even in the Emirates, where only a small number of families have enormous wealth and the general population do not yet have access to capital. If you want to start a business, you can get some, but so many families control an enormous part of their economies. Maybe even in Morocco, about 20 families control the economy. I have to say, the most diversified economy in the Middle East is Egypt. That's what yet gives me hope, that if you get the right economic conditions in place, that the economy would grow much faster and go back to be the darling as it was of the global investment banks. But again, it's much more than that. But I think that, going back about my point I made earlier, is the government, which has disappointed, must come up with ideas. And I think where we are short, where we listened to the talk earlier, and I don't want to be very critical of the talk earlier, is we need ideas. We need creative ideas, how to change the Middle East. We're too caught up in older ideas. We've got to, for example, where the last government in Egypt said, let's increase taxes. Well, if you're not feeling good, if you increase taxes, you're not going to feel better. A bit like George Osborne in the United Kingdom. You cut the taxes, you make people feel better, then you help create a change. And in terms of the law and civil society, kick out the NGO cases in Egypt, where I have to say I think Western governments have not helped gently to come and say, look, why don't you just remove those cases and take them away? Because that does not help civil society movements, which does help Egypt in the longer term. I think that the governments everywhere have to look at what they can really do to help the 2% growth in population find new jobs and find a way to bring them into the body politic. Because right now I'm hearing everyone talks very positively about the fact that everyone can talk about politics in Egypt. They can, except in state media. And I'm sorry about the state media. I don't like it at all. But generally, you can hear everyone talking, and that's great for Egypt, and I think it's great for elsewhere in the region, but not in the Gulf. And I think that the one elephant in the room is nobody wants to criticize the GCC because they're rich, because they supply gas. And I think we have to step back and say, no, there are changes. There are changes coming across, even in the GCC. And stop making it just about them and us, about Iran and the Gulf. You have to get back and say to the leaders of the GCC, it's more than this. You have to help create a different milieu for the young to take part in overall society.
Thanks. Although in Egypt it is very difficult, socially difficult, and it will be socially difficult to implement economic reforms. And we learned that the hard way in Poland in the 90s, because you have to cut subsidies. Well, bread is actually free in Egypt.
It's not free.
It is almost free. You get, for £1, you get 20 loaves. I mean, these are tiny loaves, but still. And fuel is subsidized. It's very cheap. Again, it's not the market price. How do you go about those economic reforms without this social anger?
Yeah, you're absolutely right on the food issue. First of all, food has to be subsidized in Egypt. It's not part of anyone's political equation right now because it's politically explosive. But the fuel issue, the interesting thing about petrol being, or gas, whatever you call it, being subsidized, is that only really the rich benefit. I was in El Gouna for a wedding 2 weeks ago. It was tremendous. By the way, any of you who want to go on a holiday in Egypt, go to El Gouna. You will have a wonderful time. It is safe and wonderful. But let me say this. It's full of yachts, expensive yachts, that were 3/5 of the cost of the petrol is subsidized by the Egyptian taxpayer. They're being if you go to the Sahel on the north coast, the Egyptian government is paying for you for two-thirds of your journey there and back. They shouldn't be doing that. The rich are being subsidized. So I think that the subsidy issue can be tackled very easily by saying it's the rich who benefit, and they do. And I think that's one issue that can be tackled pretty easily. The electricity prices have been rising quite sharply over the last 2 years. That's less of an issue. Gas has been tackled. Industrial costs of gas have been tackled by the major users of gas. But everything is other issues that's still being subsidized. But I think no one's discussing food at the moment. But what I'd say is important for Egypt is food price inflation remains unsustainably high. It's currently running about actually 13% formally, but for vegetables it's rising higher. That is unsustainable for a poor country. So we need to tackle increasing agriculture in Egypt and cutting food wastage, which the World Bank currently estimates around 50%. So the issues are able to be tackled, but have to be tackled, first of all, with some firmness, of course, and bravery, but they can be tackled if you use the right political narrative with the public.
Thanks. We've had some reforms in the Palestinian territories as well, the Fayyad plan, which turned out rather successful. Amira, let me get back to you. I wonder what impact, in your opinion, has the Arab awakening had on the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli peace process, and how things stand right now?
You certainly cannot regard the territory that Salam Fayyad was its prime minister to equate it with states, with independent states, and to use the word reform in a casual way. And it has not succeeded, the reform, by the way. I would phrase the question in a bit differently and ask what we asked ourselves when the revolution started in the Arab world. In what way will these revolutions enhance our fight, and I include myself in this, our fight against Israeli apartheid? This is what really evoked our imagination when it started. Not only, but when it comes to our territory. Because this Israeli apartheid is this tremendous abnormalcy that continues and continues and continues with a lot of toleration on the part of the Western world and impunity. And the question was, indeed, Will it help? Will the revolutions help? And at the beginning, it seemed it will. If I just look at the level of the peoples, not the popular level, then of course it gave the Palestinians a lot of pride as part of the Arab peoples. It gave them a lot of pride, re-invoked their self-esteem as Arab peoples, to see that they are friends and brothers revolting against such despotic regimes that they know at first hand. The second thing, that it empowered them also vis-a-vis both, or we hoped, so at the beginning it felt that it would empower them vis-a-vis their own leaderships and vis-a-vis Israel, and restore the esteem that Palestinians had, the trust that the Palestinians had during the first Intifada in the power of a popular, unarmed uprising. Because this concept of a popular uprising, unarmed uprising, has vanished, of course, during the second Intifada and gave way to, again, the myth and the cult of armed struggles. This was on the Palestinian side. On the Israeli side, we also had our little revolt. Not exactly a revolt, but a certain social protest that was very strong and very lively and encouraging during the summer of 2011. When hundreds of thousands of Israelis started to notice again and to speak against the withering away of the Israeli welfare state. I mean, this started 30 years ago under Israeli labor government, but okay, but the formulation of such terms came back. And the demand, and also there was a nice emulation of Arab slogans, the Shaib you read, so that people want social justice. This was the main slogan. A very captive one, sloganish as it is. Then this aroused, on its part, it aroused the hope that those Israelis who call for social justice will include in it the Palestinians, will start to grasp what it means for Palestinians, for 4 million Palestinians, to be ruled and dominated by Israel in a way, in some kind of a military dictatorship, because this is what it is. Israel controls Palestinians, dominates Palestinians for more than, since 67, how many years? And takes taxes, enjoys the benefits from the territory of the Palestinians, and they have no right to vote. The Israeli government decides about the future of the Palestinians, but the Palestinians have no share in this government and this future of the decision making. So there was some hope that Israeli imagination will expand. And we were disillusioned. Even at the beginning, when some of the Israeli activists tried to make the connection between occupation and social justice within Israel, they were hushed. And the attempt to connect between investment in settlements and the Israeli situation and the deterioration, economical deterioration of average Israelis, they were hushed down. So, in short and in a telegraphic way, I would say that this is not surprising, because with all the withering away of the Israeli social welfare state, the kind of substitute of this welfare state for the average Israeli is the occupation offers this kind of a substitute. Because the settlements, even if not all Israelis move to the settlements, are some kind of they are the only option for many Israelis. They are the main option for an social economical upgrade. This is one reason why many Israelis see settlements as part and parcel of the Israeli texture. Since Oslo, actually, for the past 20 years, since Oslo, it has even become more so than it was before the Oslo Agreement, because the Oslo Agreement actually legitimized the settlements, and Israelis come to see them as part that you can have peace with settlements. Also, especially in the last 20 years, a very important, not the majority of course, but a very important strata of Israelis are, or let's say, in the last 20 years, the part of Israeli security expertise is growing larger and larger and taking larger place in the Israeli export and in the Israeli international fame. Security, not only its armament, its security, its high-tech connected to security. The more the world goes towards the, perfects the techniques of surveillance and containment of social unrest all over, the bigger is the place of Israel, because we have our ready-made laboratory for this expertise, security expertise. Now, this security strata, Israeli military security strata, is very dominant in the Israeli society, even though it's not, of course, it's not the majority. But it has a political say and a moral say, because they are the soldiers. They are defending our security. They are protecting us. So they are heard much more than anybody else in the society. Thanks. So, in that sense, we are also disappointed, because the idea of social justice and mutuality and dignity has not penetrated the Israeli general imagination when it comes to the Palestinians. Now, and this is my last point, with the ever brutalization that is happening, first in Syria, now in Egypt, it is very easy to say, oh, we are not part of this world. For people who, or it's in a way normal and understandable that you make a comparison between the dead here, the casualties here, and the casualties there. So if one measures Israeli domination or Israeli apartheid or Israeli military dictatorship over the Palestinians in the number, in the figures of martyrs or dead people, then of course it is being dwarfed. It is, and Palestinians say themselves that in 2 years in Syria, you have more dead people than Israel ever killed of Palestinians during years of the conflict, 100 years or so. But the Israeli violence and cannot be measured by the number of dead. The scope of this permanent insult in which one lives under this permanent Israeli arrogant, really arrogant, humiliating domination, and very tricky, very, very sly. You have your government, you have your two governments actually, you have your ministers, so it's not us, it's you. There is bureaucratic violence about Israeli domination that escapes attention when you make a comparison of blood and casualties. So this brutalization has helped in dwarfing the enormity of this Israeli injustice and abnormalcy, that with everything said, is at the end and in the future might also affect the chances of a Jewish community to remain in that region.
I guess it is there regardless of the Arab revolts. Had it been there, had they were there or not, it would be, in your opinion, the same. There is a new initiative, the Kerry initiative, and Kerry has invested a lot in it, in the talks. Amira, we will talk about that later on, but since many people are leaving, I just want to give them the floor, and I will, with the Kerry initiative, I would turn to Robert to ask about the United States, and I guess John Kerry is now involved in a different task than the peace process between the Palestinians and Israelis. But my general question to you is about the American strategy towards the Arab world, because still, we know how the Obama administration struggled in response to what happened in Egypt and Tunisia, eventually, at least rhetorically, taking the side of the Arab street. But how do you reconcile that with the still strong partnership with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states about which Angus has talked?
The world is an imperfect world. That's how I reconcile it. The fact of the matter is, the events in the Arab world were not started by the United States. They're not going to be stopped by the United States. What's happening is an organic, localized set of events. And unfortunately, maybe the one thing that unifies almost all parties involved is their criticism of the United States. That's fair. When you're still the world's single military superpower, that's the burden you must share, you must uphold. Even in your question, you said the United States struggled or the Obama administration struggled. That's true. It is a struggle. When you are a military superpower and you have alliances that are long held, but yet you have a commitment to a set of principles of liberty and freedom and dignity and self-determination, it is a struggle when you see people essentially rebelling against the status quo on the proper balance of support for those efforts. But I think by and large, the United States has supported those efforts. I can't think of another time in history, quite frankly, where a world power supported efforts of change, knowing more likely than not the people who would benefit from that change are not necessarily allies of the United States of America. President Obama, when he suggested that President Mubarak should step aside, understood full well the risk that what was likely to come after President Mubarak was likely to be less friendly to the United States of America. And with all due respect to whether it was a coup or not a coup in Egypt, I mean, the American policy is clear. It wasn't a coup, because if it was a coup, we couldn't then have relations with the current government, so we never call it a coup. But we shouldn't, as students of democracy, we shouldn't kid ourselves either. If the United States has learned anything in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years, is that democracy cannot be defined by elections themselves. Democracy is a much more layered set of factors. And the one thing we shouldn't do is stand by when parties, whoever they are, use democracy for undemocratic purposes. A party that participates in a democratic election, and then when achieving power seeks to undermine several levers of that democratic process, no longer qualifies as a democratic participant. Now, the United States didn't engineer what occurred most recently in Egypt. If we did, it never would have worked. But for those that might criticize the United States for now embracing to a certain degree the new order in Egypt, I would respectfully suggest that in an imperfect situation, the United States has remained true to its principles, which are, we will seek, in the most difficult of circumstances, to encourage the expansion of liberty and freedom and liberal thought and progressiveness. So now that there has been yet another change in Egypt, we will work with these officials to expand the democratic opportunity in as rational and as fast a process that is pragmatic under the circumstances. On the same token, you started talking about, obviously, the Kerry Initiative. Again, an imperfect situation. But there is no other party in the world that is working as persistently to make certain that the Israelis and the Palestinians negotiate in good faith the core issues that define the Israeli-Palestinian conflict than does the United States and does the Obama administration. Does anyone believe that the Israelis and the Palestinians would be at a negotiation table today if it weren't for the actions of the Obama administration? And not to go from one topic to another, but I also think it's important in that the topic of the day is Syria. And again, President Obama finds himself probably on the short side of American public opinion and certainly on the short side of European public opinion. And I support the President's position in terms of an authorization of a military strike. But I, as a supporter of Obama's position, must acknowledge that diplomatic opportunities must, before a military action occurs, be exhausted. So the President pivoted, for lack of a better word, very quickly, very ably, was ridiculed in many press accounts in the world, but at the opportunity of diplomacy, he's exercising it. Secretary Kerry today is with his Russian counterpart, and will analyze whether or not it's a genuine, legitimate attempt to resolve the crisis and put Syria's chemical weapons under international control. What other world leader would do that in such a public stage? On the other hand, all the people who oppose President Obama's decision to employ a military strike relative to Syria must be equally honest and acknowledge that but for the President's decision and his public declaration, there's no way that Russia, let alone Syria, would be considering a process of turning over chemical weapons to the international community. So when we talk about the role of America, I would essentially say two things. Number one, we didn't start the Arab Spring or the Arab Rebellion or the Arab Awakening, whatever you want to call it, and we're not going to stop it. But there are particular times and particular places where the world requires a leader. America is not uniquely qualified. But unfortunately, at this point in history, there are no other actors that have the wherewithal to apply certain elements of leadership. And the good news is, while America too is imperfect and we make mistakes, essentially though, those decisions are driven mostly by principle and of course self-interest. But American self-interest, I would argue at the risk of being criticized by everyone in the room, is not often as destructive as the self-interest of many other nations and how they express it. We are not a country that engages in colonization, and we are a country, by and large, that respects liberty and dignity and will work for it in every part of the globe. It doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. And with all due respect, just quickly, in terms of the analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, of which, of course, America also gets criticized a great deal in the region and in Europe for being too closely aligned with Israel, here again, a principled position. We stand by our ally. We make certain that Israel's military qualitative defense is superior as much as possible to its neighbors. But we don't stop for a moment in terms of seeking a negotiated resolution between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And we have the same position on settlements in terms of their legality as does Europe. But we also understand the pragmatic nature of the fact that the truth is there are a difference between settlements in terms of how they impact the eventual resolution, hopefully, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it is possible that a Palestinian sovereign state can be attained based on the 1967 borders, lines, with agreed territorial swaps, where Israel retains between 70 and 80% of the Jewish residents outside of the 67 lines to be incorporated within Israel in internationally recognized borders. So when Israel goes and further develops those settlements, which I think most parties would agree would be within those borders, while principally that's objectionable, and we say that, we also understand that ultimately that will not have the impact of impairing a two-state solution. Now, there are certain settlements that will. And to the degree that Israel cuts off East Jerusalem from the West Bank, that is quite damaging. To the degree that Israel develops in remote areas, that is quite damaging. But to vilify Israel in the way that certain parties do is also damaging to the process.
In any event, in any American future strategy for the region and for the Arab world, there will surely be still one major obstacle. That is the anti-Americanism that is common throughout the region. And be it before the Arab awakening or now, the anti-American feeling is still very vivid. Actually, the Tamarrud movement, who prepared the petition to oust Morsi, with the 7 points. One of the points said, it's because you follow the Americans. And they are preparing another petition. Maybe they have been stopped now, but they wanted to prepare a petition to cut the American aid to the Egyptian army and to cut ties with Israel. So it goes across the political spectrum, be it Islamist or anti-Islamists. They are all anti-American, unfortunately. Let's go back to the audience then, and Sir, you take the floor then.
Well, thank you again. Actually, I'm going to take from your last point. The Egyptians, when they are talking about wanting to cut the aid, is because they refuse that this aid would be combined with actions to be applied on them. This is why sometimes the Egyptians look at the aid as it's a tool used against them, not for them. Again, I'm going to retake what I have just said regarding the 30th of June revolution, actually, when they took the streets in millions. I mean, Mr. Blair, I believe he was in Cairo at the time, where he witnessed, more than 30 millions in all the squares of Egypt, going out in the streets demanding the ouster of the former president. These were the same Egyptians who went out in 2011, and that the whole world was they regained the respect of the whole world and the admiration of these men and women that really wanted to get back and defend peacefully, to defend a free and tolerant and open Egypt where social justice would prevail. They have continued to defend these principles against the forces and of backwardness actually that was implied on them after the 2011 revolution. What do we want to say? Because actually Professor Keppel was referring to l'Égypte de Morsi, l'Égypte de Sisi. L'Égypte is the Egypt of the Egypt of the Egyptians, not of Sisi, not of well, no, because I mean I was referring that to the fact that he was using the words of what happens on the 14th of August, which actually all the international community looked at it in a way. I really want to highlight the fact that during several weeks before dismantling the sit-ins, the so-called peaceful sit-ins, many the Egyptian authorities tolerated and protected these manifestations and sit-ins. Many high officials were asked to come to Egypt and to meet even with the ousted president. Many reporters were allowed into these sit-ins. I don't know if Mr. Blair was allowed in by the manifestators or not, but among them was Mr. Robert Fisk, where actually there were witnessed also that there was not really peaceful sit-ins. There were arms there. The amount of casualties that the well-trained security officials had does not show that these were peaceful sit-ins. What we really want to emphasize on, what I really would like to emphasize on, is that the roadmap that the Egyptian government is now applying, we are insisting on going on with this roadmap, going on with having, going on with being committed to the roadmap, and we remain committed to an inclusive dialogue with participations of all Egyptians. This is something very important. All Egyptians are welcomed to build the future of Egypt, as long as these people were not engaged in any violence and bloodshed, which is, of course, something understandable. Thank you very much.
I think we have a question over
here. Bahidin Hassan from the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. In fact, I had an early comment on our Tunisian friend, Professor Driss. I share him his opinion and also his hope that Tunisia would not be on Egypt's path or Egypt way. I share him his opinion about the difference between the attitude of the military in Egypt and Tunisia. But I would like to add additional two factors. One of them concerning Islamists. I think that the Islamists, or mainly in Nahda, is less rigid, less fanatic than the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, less exclusive than the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, has a little bit moderate interpretation of Islam in relation to politics than Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So this is another factor which might help Tunisia to avoid the Egyptian model. A third factor, which is the ability of the revolutionaries in Tunisia to work with the reformists of the former regime. The new political party, which is Nida Tunis, Tunisian Appeal or Tunisia Appeal, it is a new model in what so-called Arab Spring countries, which combine many prominent symbols of the new generations, the revolutionaries of the and the opposition against Zain al-Abidin regime, and also working closely, I mean, in the same party with the reformists of the party, the party of Zain al-Abidin bin Ali. This is, I think, this is very important factor which we don't see it in Egypt, and therefore this is one of the factors which push more Egypt in such a dilemma. Thank you very much for Driss for his excellent presentation.
Hi, I'm Dimitris Bouris. I'm Research Fellow at the European Neighbourhood Policy Chair here at the College of Europe in Natolin. And first of all, I would like to thank all of the speakers for this inspiring exchange of views and interesting. I've got a very brief question, mainly for Amira. You referred a lot to Israel and the occupation and the facts on the ground, and I'm very sympathetic with all this view, but I was just wondering if you could give us some insights from the inside of Palestinian politics, because Palestinians took the streets and those protests were extinguished by their own police, the Palestinian police. So Palestinians took the streets to ask for a reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, and which obviously didn't take place. And I was just wondering if you think that the Palestinians missed an opportunity there because of the Arab Revolts. They missed an opportunity to move towards more democratic politics and policy, let's say. Thank you.
Sorry. My name is Mazen Kumsiya, and I'll be speaking tomorrow a little bit. And tomorrow I will speak about why I am optimistic about the situation in the Middle East, much more optimistic maybe than some of the speakers here, and maybe some of the audience. But anyway, I have a question for Amira, and it has to do with the notions of what I call government hypocrisy or political hypocrisy in the West. Many government officials, congressmen in the US and others, speak about human rights, democracy, so forth, but they have this exceptionalist ideas that somehow Israel is an exception, and I think that's probably why in the Arab world, in the Arab revolts, when there's a revolt in Egypt, they have Palestinian flags. In Tunisia, Palestinian flags. In Libya, Palestinian flags. Because these revolts connect to this hypocrisy. When, for example, one of the speakers spoke about the heart-wrenching images of children in Syria that are gassed. Yes, it is heart-wrenching. But why don't these same people also speak about Israel using white phosphorus in Gaza, using cluster bombs in Lebanon, using one-ton bombs that are dropped from airplanes in refugee camps, supported by America, which keeps talking about democracy and human rights. This hypocrisy is no more blatantly obvious than it is in the case of Israel-Palestine, the apartheid that you referred to. I'm wondering if the Israeli public, if you can enlighten us a little bit on this, if the Israeli public sees why, if this hypocrisy continues, the Arab revolts, which will be for democracy indeed in the beginning, but eventually Arab world, if there is democracy in the Arab world, they will turn their attention to the biggest violator of human rights in the Middle East, which is not those dictators, petty, idiotic dictators that are supported by the West. And we have to remember that Mubarak was supported by the West, that Ben Ali was supported by the US, that Bahrain, there was violations of human rights, that the West continues to support to this day, that these publics will turn finally and ultimately to this issue because of this hypocrisy. Thank you.
Wśród publicystów panuje pogląd, że Al-Kaida przekonstruowała swoją działalność i teraz próbuje utworzyć kalifat jako...
Jedna chwileczka, dobrze? Bo muszą pana rozumieć.
Przepraszam, jeszcze raz powtórzę. Można?
Right, we may be ready.
Wśród publicystów panuje pogląd, że Al-Kaida przekonstruowała swoją działalność i teraz próbuje utworzyć kalifat jako zalążek swoich wpływów oraz władzy. Chce w ten sposób przenieść ideę na cały świat. Pytanie do naszych wykładowców. Czy Syria nie została przez Al-Kaidę wybrana do tego celu? Dziękuję. Czy Syria nie została przez Al-Kaidę wybrana do tego celu?
Basically, the question is whether Syria is the place where the global caliphate will start from, and it was chosen by Al-Qaeda to be the nest of the future global caliphate. There are questions over here. We'll take a couple more and get back to the panel. Sir?
Thank you very much, Chair. Koray Çalışkan, Professor of Politics at Bosphorus University, Istanbul, columnist with Radikal newspaper. I believe Turkey had played a critical role in what had been going on, yet there had been a radical change in the ways in which Turkey was considered in the Middle East. In the last 2 years, Turkish foreign policy changed radically to the extent that the foreign minister decided not to acknowledge al-Nusra as a terrorist organization. They were just extremists in Syria. The question is, how do you factor in the changing role of Turkey in the Middle East? Last week I was in Baghdad with a delegation of Turkish head opposition party. I met with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. They simply do not consider Turkey as a neighbor that they had to consult on anything, and they realized that their relationship completely collapsed with Turkey. Similarly, Turkey's relationship with Syria completely collapsed. Turkey's relationship with Egypt completely collapsed. The head of opposition also went to Egypt. They were there, they came back from Cairo yesterday, only to realize that the Turkish Minister of Foreign Affairs did not have any relationship with Egyptians right now. Turkey is the only secular country, Muslim secular country, that might serve as a model to the Muslim world, yet it seems like the model is collapsing. How would this factor in your analysis is the question. Sorry, okay. It took some time.
Last two questions maybe. Gentleman over there.
May I speak in Arabic, please?
Okay. I don't know.
شكرا جزيلا لدعوتكم. أنا حمزة حسن من السفارة السورية، وشكرا على كل ما طرح في هذا المؤتمر الهام. طبعا هناك قضايا كثيرة تستحق النقاش والاهتمام، ولكن فقط أنا أريد أن أوجه سؤال بسيط للسيد جيل كيبل، أسأله كيف تقمص دور كولين باول، وهو الذي انتقده في المقدمة، حيث كذبة كولين باول أدت إلى احتلال العراق، وكلنا بدون دخول في التفاصيل. كيف تقمص دوره الآن وهو يرفع نظارته بدل الأنبوبة التي رفعها كولين باول؟ وأظن أن نظارته ملوثة بكيمياء النظام السوري. كيف، من أين أتى بالدليل وهو مثقف وأكاديمي؟ من أين أتى بهذا ليقدم لنا الدليل؟ طبعا هذا تجني. أنا لا أريد منه أن يبرئ النظام أو يبرئ أو يتهم المعارضة، ولكن لا أريد له أن يكون ناطق باسم جبهة النصرة التي هي فرع للقاعدة. وطبعا النتيجة المدمرة التي تأتي على مثل هكذا شهادات. وطبعا ربما لا تعرفون من هو، طبعا أنا أعرفه، هو من بلد استعمر بلدي وقتل مئات الآلاف في بلدي وفي الجزائر وفي بلدان عربية كثيرة. لذلك لا غرابة أيضا أن يدلي بشهادة ستؤدي أيضا إلى تدمير بلدي. طبعا أنا أتألم كثيرا، ونحن كحكومة وكمعارضة وطنية ضد استخدام السلاح الكيميائي وضد استخدام أي نوع من أنواع السلاح. اعذروني أنا متألم، نحن نتألم، لدينا شفقة ولدينا قلوب، ونتألم على ما يحدث في بلدنا. وطبعا مشكلتنا لا تقتصر فقط على ربما أطلت لكن أتكلم بسرعة. لكن أنا يعني كنت أستغرب من هكذا مثقف أن يتحدث بهذه الطريقة. طبعا عندي أستطيع أن أتحدث الكثير، ولكن سأكتفي بهذا القدر. شكرا.
And the last question, the gentleman in front.
Thank you. My name is Cyprian Kozara. I'm from National Defense University here in Warsaw. I'm not so experienced in monologues as my predecessors, so I would just ask a question. What's the impact, if you could assess, what's the impact of the Arab Spring, whatever you call it, on transnational organized crime in the region? Thank you. Transnational organized crime.
Okay, a specific issue. Let's go back to the panel now. We have a whole plate of different questions, remarks, from the great powers, hypocrisy, to Al-Qaeda, the role of Turkey, the complexity of the situation in Syria, and the transnational organized crime. Robert, may we start from you this time?
Well, let me
whatever you want to tell.
Sure. Just quickly on the role of Turkey. Turkey, from an American perspective, is critical in almost every aspect, whether it relates to our policy in Syria, whether it relates to Iraq, whether it relates to Afghanistan, whether it relates to energy in Europe, whether it relates to hopefully being able to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon capable nation. Turkey is instrumental. What is concerning is that the Turkish leadership of late has taken positions at times which I'm afraid compromises its own ability to play an essentially positive role, and the role at times of a necessary mediator, or at times even an interlocutor. Prime Minister Erdogan, while I think he has many strengths and has performed a miracle in terms of the Turkish economy, taking it from a debtor, almost failed state to a regional economic power. No doubt they now have had some problems, but he has isolated himself unnecessarily of late. The gentleman who spoke outlined all of the changes, and I think maybe the best change that illustrates this is the relationship between Turkey and Israel. Understanding that there were dramatic differences of opinion as a result of the flotilla incident in which 9 Turkish citizens were killed. But after 2 years of extended negotiation, and dramatically when President Obama visited Israel and was able to arrange a telephone conference between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Erdogan, and Prime Minister Netanyahu issued an apology. Unfortunately, even after that apology, the ability to create a stronger, better relationship has been very slow in the coming. I highlight this because Turkey's ability to play a moderating role requires that it have strong relations with both sides or several sides in these various conflicts. And when Turkey aligns itself so strongly with one, and when Prime Minister Erdogan employs language that I think we would all agree is quite inflammatory, he essentially eliminates himself from playing a constructive role. And that, I think, is not only harmful to Turkey, but it also actually is harmful to the United States, and it's harmful to the cause of moderation and stability, because Turkey, in fact, plays a moderating and stable role, which is very important for all of our interests. One other thing, and the question was not addressed to me, but with all due respect, Israel's policy relative to the Palestinians is subject to legitimate criticism. Israel's policy is subject to legitimate debate. But respectfully, for those citizens who believe that the problems in the Arab world are even remotely connected to Israel or Israel's policy relative to the Palestinians, that position is completely devoid of any intellectual honesty whatsoever. And if anything, what the Arab Spring should have proven to the world is that the injustices that occur in the Arab world, the lack of liberty, the lack of opportunity, is a result of the conditions of the Arab leadership and the localized scenarios. And to use the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as legitimate a discussion as that is, but to use that as a scapegoat, respectfully, I don't think brings one bit of reform in the way that it is required to be brought to the Arab world. And to highlight what may be challenges or violations of international human rights, to highlight Israel in a way in which it becomes the center or focus of attention, with all due respect, just flies in the face of reality. If you want to talk about human rights violations with respect to Palestinians, and I'm not minimizing anything that Israel may be guilty of, but human rights violations relative to Palestinians, look in Gaza. There have been more horrific human rights violations practiced by Hamas, administered by Hamas on the Palestinian people than Israel would ever dare, and nor would they ever. Likewise, there are certainly violations in terms in the West Bank of Fatah relative to its political opponents. And go across the Arab world, unfortunately, there isn't an Arab nation that gets anywhere close to the record of human rights that Israel has practiced. Has Israel made mistakes? Is Israel accountable for those mistakes? Absolutely. But the type of distortion that at times is presented, with all due respect, I don't think does justice to the integrity of what's happening in these Arab countries as people seek their dignity and their self-determination.
Thanks. I wanted Amira to speak second, but now I think I'll turn over to Ahmed.
Okay. I will start with the last question about transnational criminality or organized criminality, because this is an important aspect of the uprising, the results of the uprisings in the Arab world. And you can imagine when the criminal organization can act, when you have a vulnerable state. And in the region now, we have vulnerable states. When the state is very weak, you have a sort of, the criminal organization is well prepared to gain space. And so now in Tunisia, we have, in the region in general, not only in Tunisia, between Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and imagine between Egypt and Libya, you have organization who is trafficking weapons, and also you have human trafficking, using the Africans that using the Tunisian territory to try to go to Europe, and they are acting easily. So this is a first impact, and this is reality, vulnerability of the state. So speaking about optimism or pessimism is okay. It's important, but for me, it's not the moment to speak about optimism or pessimism. We have to speak about the reality, and reality now is complicated, and we have a very vulnerable state, and we have a real problem. We are in a situation of real catastrophe in our. I'm not pessimistic, but I am just describing to you the situation. And the situation is complicated. And I explain you another element why the situation is complicated. The hope, the enthusiasm, or after the revolution, that everything will change. I have now the feeling that things are really changing. You know, personally, I spent more than 20 years, and since 91. When the regime in Tunisia changed to step by step to a real dictatorship. And in 2001, they gained again 10 years So I spent those years to explain the nature of this dictatorship and the nature of tools used by this regime to be in a dictatorship but to appear like a democracy. And I'm afraid that I will spend again 10 or more 10 years again to explain the tools who are used now by the rulers that have now, which is the same tools used by the old regime. I can tell you about, it's not an anecdote, but yesterday or the day before, in a program, in a radio program, it was a sort of forum, a public forum in the radio, and the question is, why, before the revolution, Tunisia was better? Why? This is the question of the forum, and people are participating in this forum, and etc. And after the program, the presidency of the republic, someone from the presidency of the republic, asked to the procureur of the republic to ask this guy, this responsible of the program, for a trial. This was the same to use it before the revolution, when there are no police arriving and capturing the guys. No, tribunal, using legal tools. But it was clear that this guy will be tried for his opinion and because he touched a sort of non-touchable issue. And this is very, very, very dangerous. You know, I thank you very much for your remarks, Baha, on the moderate Islamists, which are Nahda. Okay, but you are speaking about Nahda as a party, as a unified party, as a unique organization. But don't forget that within the Nahda you have different courants, different L's. And unfortunately, and for Tunisia, the more radical L's within Nahda are now in power. They are more powerful than we can imagine. And when their president Ghannouchi want to be moderate and want to appear like a moderate, the Majlis al-Shura, the council, the Shura Council, which is the board, the governing board of another, decide to say, no. You have to follow our decision, and our decision is don't to accept to be moderate, don't accept to be the opposition as an alternative or the proposal of. So that means that we have to deal with those people, and those people are very, very radical. And again, it's not anecdote; it's a reality. Those people who are, I am accusing them of connivance with the radicals and with the jihadis. When a group of jihadis established itself in a mountain in the center of Tunisia, which is Shambi, just to train themselves to be powerful, etc. One of those people, moderate people of another, said that no, they are هم يعملوا رياضة. They are but sport training. It's not they are young people having some space for sports training. So that means that the same in Egypt. Okay, but hope that we're now having the same results in Tunisia too. Thank you.
Angus?
Brief. Has the Syrian embassy fellow, is he still here or is he gone?
He's gone, I think. The Syrian?
Yes, that's a shame. Perhaps tomorrow we can tackle his lack of moral judgment. On Turkey, it's interesting that 2 years ago in Egypt, when Prime Minister Erdogan came to Egypt, he was feted like an absolute hero when he came. And you're right, the attitudes towards Turkey have changed enormously. In discussion of the Middle East and North Africa, using the Turkish model was again rather simplistic, rather Orientalist again. I think we've got to have much more complex and nuanced narrative when it comes to models, because each country is different in the end, in positive and negative ways, and calls for different solutions. And I think that Turkey is going to find it very difficult to, in the case of Egypt, I think win more general support from the government and the authorities, because post-Taksim and the supposed close association with the Muslim Brotherhood, trying to win support is going to be quite difficult, and probably means different people at the top. So it's a more complex, I think, issue than we can answer here, because the Premier Erdogan has done what President Morsi was doing in Egypt, in that he was trying to change society to the values of his own party rather than being an inclusive policy. The issue is interesting, transnational crime, because it's something that's overlooked. Ahmed's absolutely right. The issue needs much more spotlight on it, on human trafficking and the movement of arms around the region. We can see the trouble which the Egyptian government has at the moment in Sinai. And of course, wherever there's a problem of lack of governance, and unsavory elements move in. I think one of the issues historically is there was certainly transnational corruption in the leisure sector in terms of money laundering, money going into certain areas across the MENA region in the leisure sector. The United Kingdom has launched its Anti-Bribery Act, which is probably the toughest Anti-Bribery Act anywhere in the world, which means if you do business anywhere in the world, including the Middle East, even $10 would be viewed as a bribe. So British companies and individuals across the region have to be much more alert to what they do. But I have to say, a number of central banks across the EU are quite concerned about certain money laundering issues, particularly in the Emirates and particularly and specifically in Dubai, and raise questions about issues that they still remain in terms of transnational money laundering issues. There are a variety of issues that need to be discussed at a future date. Human trafficking, which has been highlighted by CNN particularly. The BBC, I think, also highlighted it. The movement of weapons, which I think, all are very, very concerned about, and the ease of access of weaponry across the region. And I think other issues But I think that one issue isn't just so much transnational organized crime as crime within the states themselves. And I'd look, for example, at Lebanon and sectarian crime within the country. But it again calls for a specific conference, because you've raised an important point that doesn't really get raised very often.
Amira, please.
Coming to think about transboundary crime, then, or transinternational, if you look at this region as a region where the national delineation is false, then the stress would be more about crime than about transboundary or transnational. But this is just a little comment. I'll restrict to the Israeli-Palestinian. You asked, and thanks for reminding me, of course, the immediate impact was for some Palestinian groups, mostly young people, to assemble and also to have their own demands of the Palestinian two governments, so-called governments. And true, both governments crushed this from the start. But I think that even without the crushing, the mood among Palestinians is not very high right now for mass movements. For years, there are the examples of popular struggle in villages against the Israeli occupation, and this, unfortunately, has been restricted to these villages. It's not that the masses of Palestinians join the struggles, weekly struggles and struggles against the separation wall, etc. So the mood among Palestinians is now has not changed even with the Arab Spring, even at the start. So the crushing it showed how much those two governments are wary of criticism. But I think that even if they didn't repress them, this wouldn't have, so I suspect, wouldn't have grown to a real mass movement, unfortunately. Not yet. But people are cooking things, things are changing, ideas are changing. One of the revelations of the Arab Spring, at the hopeful start of it, was that you don't need a leader, one leader. You don't need a Führer. A movement can create a change and can create a discourse and demands without a Politburo. But now we see that it has its setbacks, of course, and you do need this planning. So Palestinians have to navigate between the one leader model of today and this total lack of leaders, and build up new leaderships, and it takes time. And this is happening. Does it happen in a direction that is, or to which direction it develops? I agree with Elliot, Mazen, that you cannot put the blame, that everything that happens in the Arab world, you have to put the blame, you can put the blame on the Israeli domination over, undemocratic domination over Palestinians, or the existence of Palestinians. We have to look at also the genuine autonomous shortcomings of Arab life and Arab traditions, etc. It's not. But what's true is that Israel is taken, and let's leave it now if it's correct or not, as a offshoot of American imperialism in the region, that it safeguards American interests in the region, that it's there to protect American and the West control over petrol resources, over this territory. And the people perceive it as such. People perceive Israeli position and Israeli role as such. And Israel gives them many reasons, Israel and America give them many reasons to believe that this is so, that Israel is a client of America, used to dare to be able to suppress. Now, I totally disagree with the analysis that from the start this was the role of Israel. Israel, and this is for your question about hypocrisy. If Palestinians want really to understand Israel, it cannot be only analyzing it as a product of a colonialist process. You have to see the European side. Europe cannot see Israel as, or cannot be neutral towards Israel. Europe cannot be intolerant towards Israel for its own reasons, for its own history. Who knows if, I don't know, if the Holocaust, if Europe under German occupation did not decide to kick out the Jews from this continent and from this life, maybe Israel would not have existed. So the Zionist project would not have succeeded. I mean, what gave until the Holocaust, Zionism was a minority among Jews. Most of the Jews did not see Zionism as the solution to their own persecution persecution in Europe. Now, if Western states would have accepted the refugees, Jewish refugees, who were kicked out of Europe.
Amira, 2 minutes.
Okay. Perhaps maybe many of them would not have emigrated to Palestine. So this exists all the time. But we talked about the future. But this is exactly right what you're asking. It doesn't matter. But right now, Israel is acting like a foreign agent in the region and like an alien in the region. So for its own and good, for the good of the Israeli society and Israeli Jewish community, we have to think how to stop to act as an alien, which sees itself as, which wants to dissociate itself and does all the time and be part of Europe and not part of this region. And while depriving Palestinians, also an indigenous people of this country, while depriving them of their rights, and it's not about the number of people killed, because if you make the count, Mazen, we are on the losing side, happily, if you count the numbers. But it's about a very meticulous and systematic way of deprivation of Palestinians, of dispossessing them from anything in their own land, starting with land and ending with their ability to decide about their future. This will counter this will fight back against, bounce back against us, the Israeli, because we are, after all, we are only a minority in the region. After all, we are not like white Americans who became majority in the United States, not overnumbering the Indians, the Red Indians. We are not. We will not overnumber the Arabs in this region, and that's why we have to listen to this region, which we are not doing.
Thanks. Now, it's been a long panel. Thanks for bearing with us. I just have two very short conclusions. One is that it's really very hard to marry the old conflict, Palestinian-Israeli, thematically, with the new development of the Arab awakening. We keep switching from one topic to another. It's hard to marry the two, even though it's the same region. And conclusion number two is that on the optimism versus pessimism spectrum, we're somewhere in the gray zone, all of us, and also the public, it seems, except for you, sir. But what Angus said is, I think, the key thing here is that it's a long process, and if 70% of the Arab world are younger than myself, then inevitably in a decade or two, these people will rule those countries. And so a change, yet another change perhaps is coming, and that change may be for the better. So thank you again, and join me in thanking the panel, please.